This is Love Your Villain, where we step into the arena and peel back the mask. The place we stop pretending we're okay and start getting curious about the parts we've been taught to hide. The angry, needy, jealous, anxious, avoidant, addicted, manipulative parts. The part that lashes out or shuts down, pushes love away, isn't broken. It's your story trying to speak. The villain you've been trying to silence is actually the part of you that needs the most love. Here, we don't shame the villain. We listen to it, get raw, intimate, and honest, while practicing being perfectly imperfect. I'm your host, Ila and welcome to Love Your Villain.
Hello, I'm here with my friend Arthur. We just met recently at an excellent festival, and while we were there, we had this great discussion. It was great about addiction, and it seems like we were quite aligned in our own personal experiences with addiction and the process of how we have overcome those addictions. How's it going?
Going really well, Ila. I'm happy to be here. Thanks for the invite.
No worries. I'm super excited about this topic. I just wanted to kick it off with, what substances are you addicted to or have been?
It's funny. I think this is one of the things that we talked about at the festival where we met. I don't really identify as being like an addict or alcoholic anymore. Of course, that will always be a part of my story. But for me, it started with alcohol, and the first time getting drunk, just feeling this complete sense of relief and feeling the way that I always hoped to feel, like that I could fit in with people and that there wasn't this kind of gaping hole in my soul. The alcohol helped to fill that, at least temporarily. And a few years later, around the time I was 20, cocaine was introduced. And that was the start of a whole chaotic, dark rodeo, we'll say, for nearly a decade. Tied in with that, too, is risky sexual behavior. I'd say alcohol, cocaine, and sex were the unholy trinity of my addictive patterns. Those are the big ones. Those have been, I won't share too much. I'll let you chime back in. But as those were removed, I can still notice that addictive charge around more innocuous things like coffee, sugar, and what that tells me is there are times when there's an inability to self-soothe, and so we turn to these substances to give us that temporary comfort. Thankfully, there's not much in my life these days that is nearly as destructive as alcohol and those other things that I mentioned. But yeah, alcohol and cocaine were the drugs of choice.
They really do go hand in hand, especially considering cocaine allows you to drink more, become the partier of the party. How long ago was it that you got real honest with yourself and owned that you were an alcoholic/cocaine addict?
I'm 39 now, and I admitted to myself and the people in my life at 29 that I can't drink like a normal person. I tried different strategies for that. And really the second half of my drinking and using career, doing things like having a drink and then having a glass of water, or not drinking liquor or things like that. At 29 rolled around, there was a bottoming out event, which for me was thankfully nowhere near as desolate and severe as I think a lot of other people, but it was enough for me to be like, if I keep doing this, I'm going to just burn my life to the ground and push away people that I really care about. And so yeah, at 29, I went to my first A meeting, started working a 12-step program. It took a number of kicks at the can, you could say, to get a good stretch of sobriety under my belt. I think from 32 to 37, I didn't have any alcohol. I was just thankful at that point to discover this by the time I turned 30. There was something symbolic about that, or something significant. Before I entered that next decade of my life, I was able to acknowledge that. And again, it wasn't super straightforward and clean process. There was relapses, and there are still things that I work on today that are still attached to that addictive part, that want monster, I sometimes like to call it. It was 29 when things really started to shift and get dramatically better for me.
Do you remember a time before you were already into the alcoholism where you were at a crossroads, like a decision maker between, if I take this path, I'm going to not be an addict, versus if I take this path, I'm going to go down that addiction path?
Not anything that I can specifically identify, but there had been a general pattern in my life of doing things to belong and to feel like I belonged. I'm a pretty sensitive, and I hope other people would say to some degree thoughtful. And I ended up spending my formative years with people that are good people, friends I ultimately appreciate and care for. But had I been not so desperately seeking belonging and approval from other people, my life would have taken a significantly different track. I don't think there was one particular event, just a general pattern of doing things to get acceptance from other people, which then led to circumstances and situations which were dangerous and fueled this addictive personality and tendencies. I don't know if this really answers your question, but I remember there being multiple occasions, conversations with my parents where they're like, do you think you have a problem? I thought I was just a normal young man hanging out with other people and friends who were drinking drinking excessively. It just didn't seem that abnormal to me until it did.
Yeah, I grew up diving into substances very young. 14 was when I first tried MDMA or ecstasy in a pill form. And we used that actually surprisingly as a tool for healing. I know it at the time. We would take it and then we would have these deep, as on anyone who's had MDMA, you have these deep discussions about trauma and life, and your heart is open. And I just remember having this amazing experience with my friends where we'd all had only a half of a pressed pill, and we went back to my friend's rumpus room and we called up a bunch of our other girlfriends. Gradually, people came over to her rumpus room, but only 4 of us were high, and we were dancing and just having such a nice, intimate time together. Not sexual in any way, shape, or form. It was just open and loving. And then as we started coming down, we got in a circle and we gradually, one by one, started talking about our individual traumas. And everyone just sat there and held space. We had absolutely no idea what we were doing. It was just this personal alignment of let's talk about our shit and let's not feel like we're the only ones who are going through something. And I will never, ever forget that moment. As I was leaning into later teens and coming into my 20s, I was really looking for more of those experiences. So I used MDMA in particular as a connector. And that I was on that drug was who I wanted to be in my everyday life and who I wish we all just open and honest, and having the ability, if somebody's telling you a truth about yourself, to not reject that or get defensive or argumentative or try to deflect it in any way. You just sit there and own it. I also will never forget the time where I first was in such emotional turmoil, and I remember having a glass of wine and how that one glass of wine took all of my pain away. And the light bulb moment for me was, oh, this is why people become alcoholics. It scared me.
Yeah.
I don't want to not feel things, but I also was scared of feeling those negative emotions and didn't want to feel them like most of us. I worked very hard for a number of years to not go down that path, but social network, getting through your 20s,
No small feat. Yeah.
working on who you are separate from your family and even your friends. I mean, your friends in your 20s become a replacement for your family. Trying to navigate all of that. I remember for myself personally, because I had that experience of the numbing and recognizing that's how I will become an addict, is because I don't want to feel anything. And I had a breakup with my first husband. I remember saying to myself, I'm going to be an alcoholic for a year, and making the decision. I was already an alcoholic, by the way. But then I just made this decision. There was a bunch of other addictions that I had. I was a serial monogamist. So I would just go from one relationship to the next. And it wasn't until I had this marriage breakup that I was like, hang on, you need to stop doing that. And so in order for me to get a grip around that, I just became alcoholic instead. Yeah. And so I went on this alcoholism, drug, sex, and rock and roll path for a year. And then I finished. I got a boyfriend, and he was also an alcoholic, but I thought, now I'm going to go on the straight and narrow. And well, anyone who's an addict knows that's just not how it works.
Flip the switch. Yeah.
No. And it's also a gradual progression to alcoholism or heroin addiction or whatever it is that your substance of choice is. It's not just boom, you're now this addict. It's a battle. You battle yourself into addiction, and then you battle yourself out of addiction. Does that resonate with you in any way? Was that kind of your experience?
Yeah. Leaving substances behind is really a lifetime journey. I said earlier in our conversation that I don't consider myself, say, an addict or alcoholic anymore. The language that we use to talk about ourselves in the world is really important. Yeah, it's not something that changes overnight. I think a lot of people can be daunted by giving up alcohol and or drugs is not going to be easy. Is it going to be worth it? Absolutely. And that's why, and a lot of 12-step groups And more generally, some of the best advice, or one of the best pieces of advice, is to just live one day at a time. It's funny though, I do remember this particular. I was much younger. I was like 18 or 19. My first real girlfriend broke up with me. I found out that she'd been sleeping with some other guy. I was pretty torn up about it, and it almost felt mechanical. I went and got a Mickey of whiskey from my parents' liquor cabinet. It was just how I had seen in the movies, swigging from the bottle to drown my sorrows. I had been drunk a couple times before that, but it was interesting just to see that mechanical response to suffering was to turn to a substance. Not to get too far into the weeds, but that's how we're conditioned to deal with pain and suffering. We're not really given very good, if any, support in moving through challenging feelings and situations. It's no surprise that people have these issues. A really extreme case is what Vancouver's downtown east side looks like. Those are all people who are really suffering, and the only thing that they can find relief from their suffering in is through drugs and alcohol. I went on a bit of a tangent there, but hopefully that's helpful for you and people listening in some way.
We aren't taught emotional literacy, right? Not taught how to label, understand, validate our own emotional experience. No one has been. I feel like Gen Z will probably be the first generation to teach their children emotional literacy a hell of a lot better than millennials have been. Everybody's doing it. It's like this conscious parenting movement. That's where it's at. We weren't given that opportunity. We were told to sit down and shut up. Our parents were coming off the back end of corporal punishment, domestic violence, under the guise of discipline. The amount of young boys from our parents' generation who are now parents and grandparents, there's only been 4 generations adults who have moved through the second wave of feminism, therefore corporal punishment too. And part of the other side of that is the emotional abuse that people aren't even able to acknowledge within family units, that they were in some way emotionally abusive to their children. And that's gone on forever. Some switch has been flicked in the last, let's say, gradually over the last 50 years, where our emotions are starting to come into play more, and people are wanting to understand their emotional experiences more and why we are the way that we are. And I do really believe that the whole emotional component is everything to do with why people are addicts. Like the number one reason.
Yeah, thinking of my own parents' experiences, and I don't know all of the nitty-gritty details, but there was clearly things that happened to them that didn't allow them to learn how to process emotions properly or be held in those challenging emotions. And it got a little more subdued, a little less extreme in the way that they showed up for me. I was a really sensitive kid that grew up in a home that was in some ways very loving and supportive, but there was often conflict and arguing and unpredictability that for the system of a young person like that leads to flooding and overwhelm. And those experiences don't just go away. If you're not able to process it at the time, that continues to live in your system as hypervigilance or thinking something's wrong with you. And when you find your way eventually to a substance that makes those feelings go away, something that feels like it's been with you your whole life, so much so that you can't even, you just think that's how life is and how it's going to be. And when you find something that helps to numb that or make it go away completely, temporarily at least, then of course you're going to use that substance. Any of us who have had experiences of being addicted or self-medicating with something can feel compassion for people that are still using in that way. There's some people out there that just don't get it and think, oh, addiction is a choice, or they could fix their lives if they really wanted to, like they should just stop drinking or using. It's really not that simple. We're talking about self-medicating essentially for intergenerational trauma. I have nieces who are 10 and 6. I feel like there is hope for these younger generations. Maybe a few months ago, I was back home visiting my parents and sister, brother-in-law, and nieces, and I went up and tickled my 10-year-old niece or something, and she's, Uncle Artie, I don't like that. That makes me feel this way. And I was flabbergasted that she was able to set a boundary in a direct, healthy way, and that she felt empowered to express how something I had done made her feel. I was like, thank you for letting me know. I didn't even know that was an option. Just swirling around in this hurricane of emotions as they come up as a young person. And yeah, we're learning a lot about where addiction comes from and these things that we can do to mitigate it in the future by talking about our emotions, finding support for moving through them.
What tools have you used over the years to help you overcome alcoholism, aside from you and any other tools up your sleeve? Any handy tools?
I'm glad you asked. I don't know how handy they are. They've been pretty handy for me. 12-step recovery and AA and those groups really helped to stabilize me and give me a place of refuge and community when you decide or you realize that you have to stop drinking. And that can feel really scary because most of the people in your life presumably are with you because you drink. And that's the main thing, or one of the main things that you do with your friends and community. So to find the rooms of it was really helpful, and just know that what I was experiencing was not abnormal. It happens to people all the time, and that there is a way out. Once I got a few years into and I was feeling a bit more stable, I could sense that there was deeper work that could be done. And I'd had a fascination and some experiences with plant and psychedelic medicines. I had a big mushroom experience at 17, which was really impactful for me. But then I started returning to them more intentionally because I knew that they could be used to continue to deepen and metabolize some of the feelings and self-exploration that was already taking place. And so ayahuasca in particular was tremendously helpful for me. I remember one ceremony in particular was maybe the fifth that I had done in a series of them. And I remember having this image. I was dancing around a fire, and the message was a symbol of my drinking, using, and reckless behavior. And the message was, you can keep dancing around this fire, but you will eventually fall in, and you're going to hurt yourself. You will hurt the people that you care about. And yeah, there's no saying you might fall in and never get out of the fire. And that was a real wake-up call for me. In addition, it also just helped me to see that even though my parents' ways of relating to me as a child and young person, and some of the ways that they parented me, or if I could design a perfect childhood, it would have been different in ways, but that they did ultimately love me and that I was loved. And even beyond my parents, just for the virtue of having been born, I was worthy of loved and lovable, and I didn't need to do anything to earn that lovability, love. Those are experiences that have left a deep imprint in me. And there's a new baseline of self-compassion and feeling of worthiness that those experiences imparted on me. The basic stuff too, for me anyway. When I first got sober, I discovered long distance running and just how it felt to have a really healthy body and sleeping well. Say now my basic addiction care practices are really simple. I try to get to bed early and sleep well, try to move my body, try to eat well. I do have a thing around ice cream. That's my harm reduction substance at this point. I probably eat a bit too much ice cream, but if it helps me to not feel a pull towards more destructive stuff, I'm happy with that. And I love ice cream. On top of that, community. The author Johann Hari has said that addiction is essentially caused by lack of connection. And when you feel connected to people in your community, you're far less likely to do something that would disrupt that connection. A huge part of what people are looking for in alcohol and substances is feeling connected to something. Maybe that's a connection to the feeling of how the substance makes them feel. But if you can keep people in community, they're far less likely to go out and look for the feeling that community brings elsewhere.
For me personally, the connection that I was missing was actually a deep connection to myself. My lack of self-worth, all the stories that I was telling myself about my loserness or that I'm unworthy of love, and in particular, mostly from my romantic relationships, just because I didn't grow up with the love of a father, unfortunately. For me, meandering myself through all of these different relationships and the serial monogamy, really just me working out, how am I supposed to be loved, or how am I supposed to be in a relationship with a man when I wasn't really given a baseline? And I would look for these men to fill the void that I was missing from my father. And that was where my anxious attachment was deeply ingrained into me. I also realized once I was really not wanting to be an alcoholic anymore, I did 3 years of talk counseling, homeopathic medicine. And that was because I understood that a lot of the addiction wasn't just the brain chemistry, it was cellular. Like, I have a long history of family members who were alcoholics. My grandparents, my father, who knows how far back that went, but far enough for me to know that not only a addiction, but also a mental one, and understanding how that was overtaking my physiology. Homeopathy for me was understanding that this is a plant medicine that works on the energy of plant. For me, it was great because I wanted to talk all this stuff out, but I also needed to get whatever these sensations and these desires were for alcohol, for drugs, for sex, for rock and roll. I just didn't want to be a victim to it anymore. Coming right back, for me, now I don't even like being drunk. I like the flavor of a really nice glass of wine. And if I'm going out to dinner, I would love that. But the moment that I even feel like I'm slightly on the edge of being drunk, my brain thinks cocaine. What can I take that's going to get rid of this feeling? Because I don't like that feeling anymore. And I also understand that the hangover for me is going to be emotionally way more difficult than whatever emotional experiencing I'm having right now that's making me want to drink the booze. And ultimately, it was disconnection that I was missing from myself, that no one's really taught self-love. We as children have to abandon ourselves, or we're taught to abandon ourselves for the sake of our parents or the sake of our siblings or other family members, friends, school, all the people. And that means that we aren't taught our internal GPS system of our intuition. We're not taught to pay attention to what our intuition is telling us. Even if initially we think that a person that we're with isn't the right person, or the friend group that we're in, we feel like we're belonging to that person and that friend group. We're going to want to stay in there. We're going to do whatever it takes. People please to the cows come home. Feel like this is the right relationship or this is the right friend group, and takes away from the connection with yourself.
We'll go to great lengths to feel connected to something. That's a human imperative, to feel like we belong somewhere. If you didn't have that, for those of us, and there's a lot of people out there who didn't have that secure attachment in childhood, then that disrupts one's connection to their own nervous system, the ability to self-regulate, the ability to trust oneself. And that's actually like a huge rediscovery I think that we can have as adults as we start to heal and transform back into a more whole version of ourselves, is that we realize, oh, actually my body and nervous system are always sending me signals and information. And it is actually something that I can trust. At one time in our lives, we had to betray that in some way to remain connected, to feel some semblance of safety with our parents, even though they were the ones that were causing that dysregulation and feeling of lack of safety. The nervous system in body starts to play a larger role too, as we become more in touch with it and start to heal and trust ourselves more. And just to return to something that you had asked, because you had mentioned it, regular just traditional psychotherapy has been profoundly helpful to me too. I wish there was some way in this world where everyone could have their own therapist covered by government healthcare. The world would transform if we could do that. There are all these like alternative approaches to addiction recovery too, but I don't want to overlook the utility of just having a good therapist and somebody that you can talk to regularly that's not going to judge you.
And I think being 5 and just being in therapy, not because there's anything massively wrong, but learning how to communicate your needs and your wants and your emotional experience in a healthy manner. And if parents also went, so parents, everyone's going to this family counseling session, and then everyone has their individual counseling sessions.
Yeah, especially the parents. Some parents are just not going to get there in this life, but yeah, God bless them.
I used to think for a long time that people shouldn't have children if they're not emotionally grown. And then I realized that for a lot of people, it's the children that makes the parents become more emotionally mature. That a lot of those people probably wouldn't be forced into emotional growth and have children. The willingness of those parents to recognize that when their 2.5-year-old child is having a tantrum and is emotionally dysregulated, and then they're matching their 2.5-year-old's tantrum as a 40-year-old, that they're currently now showing that their emotional maturity level is 2.5 years of age. That's a huge wake-up call to any parent who is like, why am I behaving the same? Why am I mirroring? Why are we mirroring?
Yeah.
And why am I like losing it at my child the way they're losing it at me? And I think a lot of people blame the child. It's the child's fault I behave this way, all of that jazz. But I think in generations to come, those children are going to be reflecting back to these parents, and the parents are going to be taking more and more notice of, oh, this is actually a me. Like, I'm the adult.
Yeah, you would hope so.
That's my hope for human evolution.
Yeah, it's a reasonable hope. Yeah. I'll hold that hope with you. Ila.
Thank you so much for participating in my awesome podcast. It's been great.
Yeah, thanks, Ila. It's been a pleasure chatting with you, and I hope this helps somebody out there in some way.